Hey everyone, and welcome to the Bricks, Bucks, and Bytes podcast, your weekly dive into funding, market, and investor news in architecture, engineering, construction, and supply chain. Before we get started though, if you're a startup founder or operator responsible for innovation in your company, or you want a deeper, more insightful look into technology in AEC, you won't want to miss our newsletter. From deep dives into particular technologies such as AI, robotics, design, software, and so on. Hot takes from investors betting big in AEC technology and advice on building tech companies, including the stories and takeaways of the most successful AEC technology founders. Head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today to get this exclusive material straight to your inbox. And now for the episode.
Good to see you again. It feels like it's been a while, a few hours after our little technical glitch yesterday. Shout out to Gabe.
Yeah, well done, Gabe.
Come on, guys, don't be so harsh on him. He was doing the best.
Well done.
I actually think, in fairness to him, he was speaking to someone very interesting. I can't remember the name of the company. Maybe Anduin?
Arduino. So it was the founder of Arduino, which is probably the open source hardware that you want to know if you're a tinkerer and an inventor.
There we go. So I think we can forgive him. What are we chatting about today, guys? So we're going to dive into, there's some recent news which has been floating around in the industry about Icon and their recent round of layoffs. So we're diving into that. And Patrick, I believe you guys, was it this Monday you published a Q4 2024 funding analysis?
Right.
So is it positive?
3 days ago.
Tuesday, maybe. Yeah, this week.
It is very positive based on quick look.
Right? I think so. Okay, Martin. 3D printing concrete.
Let's start from Icon. So a builder of 3D printed homes valued at around 2 billion, cuts about 25% of staff. 3D printed homes. What is interesting about this news, I think, is that the valuation is gigantic, 2 billion.
So raised 450 million.
Yes, raised 450 million, which is a lot. And like when I think about like new technologies or something which should be exciting, is like what's the how does it improve the current status quo, right? So that's like interesting thing that I was digging a little bit, which we can touch a little bit later. But yeah, what are your thoughts, Patrick, on Icon, like from venture point of view, about the 3D printing space as well?
Yeah, maybe more about the 3D concrete printing space that I have a perspective here, because with Icon, I have no recent insight into the company. The company is very advanced, obviously, recently, or as recently as the last few years, leaked to the public that allegedly it had a 2 billion valuation for us. At that point, we don't get involved anymore. We did have very early conversations with Icon many moons ago, 2019, 2020. But since then, I haven't talked to the firm, so I won't comment on whatever, what I think about the firm, etc., because my knowledge is just outdated about the company stuff. But I do have thoughts and questions and observations about the method and its fit. So what Icon is doing today is printing dwellings, let's call it dwellings, with concrete. Concrete is the second most used material on Earth after water and maybe money. I don't know, but in principle, that's what is being what's being used.
Hey,
by
Patrick,
Icon.
I let your Practical Nerds I was listening to yesterday where you said 2021, you think that money was the second most used material.
Oh, 2021, yes.
Yeah. So, but hey, I mean, we're not literally printing money anymore. We're only digitally printing it. So at least the forests can keep going and won't get chopped down for money.
Polymer now, no?
Maybe. Yeah. So, but back to concrete printing. So, and then if you think of concrete as a material, it really shines in two types of scenarios where you apply it either to very large surface areas or high volume areas, or two where you need very high structural integrity, typically coupled with some kind of reinforcement. Traditionally, that would have been steel rebar. Martin, correct me if I'm wrong. You're the civil engineer and the journalist, but you're also the civil engineer.
Thank you.
Yes,
That's right.
Sounds like a terrible
these
combination.
are the scenarios in which concrete shines and why concrete is being used so much. I mean, look at every tunnel in the world. Look at a lot of countries actually use concrete for building highway surfaces. I mean, have you ever driven through Texas? That's what they use. They don't use asphalt, right? And so high-rise buildings where you need a high structural integrity and you have high volume areas, concrete shines. Now, Icon applies that in a different scenario, and the 3D concrete printing companies typically apply it in a different scenario, and that is, let's print, single-story or maybe two-story dwellings. And this is what I don't understand. And I asked months ago on LinkedIn, hey, can someone please explain to me what the benefit of concrete is in a residential one-story, two-story scenario? And not a single person was actually able to give me a convincing answer of why it makes sense to use concrete for this. And I know, Martin, you have analyzed, for example, the wall structure that Icon uses because they have published together with MIT, I think, a study. I'll also, would love to hear your take here on analyzing the wall structure. But that's just the overall question and observation that I'm offering is I do not understand yet why concrete is the right material to use it in high volume for single families or small multifamily homes.
Yes, I just actually lost the material, so it's good for me.
Maybe Command Z works.
Something also worth considering is obviously, whilst mine is looking for that, is this argument of sustainability. Concrete we know is not one of the most sustainable materials to use, and there's lots of companies looking at additives and whatnot to try and reduce the carbon footprint. So does this not kind of counterintuitive to perhaps where the world is heading using concrete, or is 3D concrete typically more sustainable as a technology? I don't know if you guys know.
Normally in printed concrete, I say normally because there might be companies that have found certain ways, but normally you will actually need more cement or more other binder in order to print compared to ready-mix concrete. Mm-hmm. So actually, if you dedicate to concrete, the ready-mix version will typically require less cement or less binder.
Okay. Yeah. So I actually was not studying it before. I just looked in the preparation of this on this layoffs news. And what is interesting about it? It's like you said, the concrete should be actually applied to high strength elements that require much more strength. And I find that based on my engineering experience, that very thin layers of concrete are not really the best used, because if you need to put a reinforcement within this little cavity walls, right, then the cover between the edge of the concrete and the reinforcement, which is obviously prone to corrosion in case there is moisture ingress, etc., it makes it quite vulnerable. So as long as it would work very well for very dry climate, I really struggle to see it working long term in places which are prone to moisture, and like England is a perfect example. I just can't see it working.
So you're saying
Arizona,
Martin,
but not Washington State.
Yes, probably yes.
So Martin, you're saying that so this would be like the outside face of the wall has only a very thin layer of concrete, and very, very tightly packed behind that is the rebar. So external elements, wind, driving rain, whatever, would end up eventually penetrating and getting to the rebar.
Yeah, you can see this reinforcement in here in these little like inner skin and outer skin of the wall, and there's insulation in between, right? So, and also remedial of this is very difficult in case there is a need for remedial, because how do you do it in a way that that is just feasible and not that expensive, right? Because I guess it's easy to print it, assuming everything is printed well, but then in case there is a need for remedial, I just don't know how you do it in the right manner.
Remedial, you mean, for example, my insulation has gone bad after many moons, and I have to open the wall, fix it, and then close the wall again. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. Like, during the phase of exploitation of the building, there is a need sometimes to do something with it. It might be external circumstances, something happened, And there's always something that happens that you didn't think about, right? But going back to also, like, if someone is introducing new technology, like, what's the reason for it to exist? Like, usually you increase efficiency, you're making things cheaper, and you are trying to be more efficient with some sort of activity you're doing. And once I was reading this, I guess one of the points you can, oh, by the way, this is a report created by MIT, and there was a bunch of people from MIT and Icon putting this together.
Is it just sales propaganda, ultimately?
I don't know. It's a very,
or is it impartial?
It's a hefty piece of kind of knowledge here. So, I actually don't think it's actually super positive on Icon. So let me put this. So one of the benefits one would say of figuring out new technology to build houses is, okay, we are going to decrease embodied carbon, okay, across some time span. So in this case, 75 years. So they calculated that 2,000 square feet home printed, this is the Icon, literally Icon here, is emitting around 93.8 ton of CO2. And the equivalent of the same 2,000 square feet timber house is emitting 94.4 tons of CO2. So it's like 0.5% of a difference, right, between the concrete house, printed concrete house, and timber house. So I guess if you were comparing a printed concrete house with in situ cast concrete house, this ratio would be way different.
Hey listeners, I want to take a quick break to remind you about the Bricks and Bytes newsletter. If you're interested in learning about the technology shaping the future of construction, you won't want to miss the valuable insights we share each week. To get this exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox, head over to www.bricks-bytes.com and sign up today. Link is in the show notes. Back to the show.
But if you're comparing a good solution of a timber house with a new solution of a printed house, it's only like 0.5% difference. So it's like a nothing burger, right? And $450 million investment into $2 billion company. I just can't get my head around this.
I mean, it's maybe it's actually positive for Icon and other peers that are printing with concrete, because to Owen's earlier question, right? So the reservation might be, hey, actually concrete is less sustainable, and maybe your CO2 balance is going to be worse than traditional building. And so what they maybe can prove with these numbers, and I think, you'd have to dig really into the assumptions here. How is the other comparable home being built? Blah, blah, blah. Let's assume for the time being, this is representative of actual US, then actually, showing that you can be even more sustainable than traditional building. That's already a win for the 3D concrete printing crew in my mind. So that's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, I also heard that there was some big issues with 3D concrete and getting the necessary licenses, permits, insurance, mortgages that we typically struggle with over here in the UK, and even funding as well from banks.
Yeah, Patrick, I get your point that there is an improvement versus the current solution. However, I don't want to sound like skeptic, but there's a lot of money and there's a lot of value claimed to be generated by this $2 billion business, and there's very little of this. So I just don't know if this is the right path. But
it looks like, looking at the story of Icon, perhaps there was a lot of hype around them at the time, especially as they emerged from, in the article that was on earlier, SSXW, which in my head I thought was just a party festival for teenagers to go and enjoy themselves. But there's obviously other elements to it as well. And also the type of investor that invested in them in the early days. I think there was some big names on the cap table. So perhaps maybe a little bit of hype and overhype at the time.
Yeah, so jumping to the conclusion. So as I said, it's embodied carbon of a 3D printed single family home is approximately 0.5 lower than a structural timber frame. So that's the first one. Also, 3D printed homes achieve annual performance better than structural timber frame. savings in operational carbon range from 2% in mixed humid climate up to 9% in dry hot climate. So here this claim that it's 9% in the hot climate, it actually makes sense. So it's but it's still between 2 and 9%. I don't know how is it a lot or not.
So hold on, what you're saying, sorry, I'm not a structural/civil engineer. So what you're saying is that the comparison here that they showed of the 93.8 to the 94.4 CO2 equivalent was actually in dry climates. But if you were to do the same thing in wet climates, you would need more binder and the balance would be different?
No, so the previous chart I showed, it was the first bullet point here. So embodied carbon of 3D printed family home is approximately 0.5 lower than structural timber frames. So that's what we looked at this previous chart.
But that's only in dry climate. Is that what we're seeing here?
I actually don't know which... No. So embodied carbon of, if you build something, the materials you're using, they generated carbon to be produced, right?
Sure.
So that's embodied carbon put into the ground or in the shell of the building, and that's 5%, 0.5% difference, right?
I understand, but what I'm saying is, and maybe away from the study, but if I print with concrete in Arizona or I print with concrete in Washington State,
that should be a difference, right? Yes.
Tell me, do I need more binder in the wet climate than I need in the dry climate?
Yeah, so I think in the report it was saying that the electricity was, I don't know about binder, but I think the electricity is quite important bit here. And I think it was based on the Texas grid, something like that. So I guess Texas has one of the cheapest ones.
Okay. Yeah. And there's an interesting bullet point here. If you scroll back up to the top of the page, top right, it says 3DP homes achieve total carbon savings ranging from 2% in Baltimore, which is relatively wet, Charm City. By the way, shout out to the Ravens, playoff game coming up this weekend, to 6% in Phoenix, which is obviously very, very dry. Again, we would have to jump into the assumptions here, but what that tells me is that, yeah, in wet climates, I probably need to have more binder in that.
Maybe, yes. Okay. Yeah, so it seems like a better solution for a dry climate than... Yeah. I just can't see it in wet climate.
Overall, again, people jump into the assumptions here. Don't take any kind of study at face value, especially when corporate sponsored. We know that from pharma and healthcare. But assuming for the time being that all of this is legit, to me, that's a positive message, because 3D concrete printing has been bashed for, hey, is it really more sustainable than or less sustainable than traditional printing? And these guys at least seem to have found certain assumptions and a model under which actually the 3D concrete printing homes can be less harmful than the traditional method. Before we jump into the news here, just one more thing about 3D concrete printing. Okay, so what we've now established is that maybe it's not less harmful, it's also not a lot of more sustainable. So it's the 0.5% difference that you were pointing out, Martin, even in the assumptions of this study. Okay, so that's good. But it's also not a huge difference.
Exactly.
But then the other reason why I would use printing with concrete is for dwellings, for single family homes, small multifamily homes. What is it? Is it automation then? Okay. So, but if you think of automation, how much time does it really take to put up the walls? Because this is what this is. If you take hollow walls, no plumbing, no insulation, nothing inside there, typically for like a 1,500 square foot single family home. And I should contextualize. My family is and has been for many years a co-owner of a traditional contractor business in the US. So about single family home construction, traditional 1,500 square foot homes, my family has a bit of a history. Okay. So now 1,500 square foot homes, it takes you somewhere between 50 to 100 person days to put up the walls with traditional stick building. 50 to 100 person days, which means that if you use four-man crew, it will take you somewhere between 12 to 25 process days to put up that. Okay, so now if I use concrete printing, is it going to be 1 day? Is it going to be 2 days? No one knows. Probably the process time is not the big point here, but maybe it's the person hours. Okay, so how much time am I really going to save on that amount of person hours? It's maybe $10,000. The overall home is going to be sold for $800,000. I don't understand the automation advantage here, especially when for the alternative materials, stick built with wood, or in Europe, maybe built with bricks, there's already automation technologies also being developed that are way cheaper. So I don't understand the automation advantage in this scenario. And I get it in other scenarios when I go into infrastructure potentially, when I go into high-rise potentially. Maybe I understand the advantages of concrete.
Yes.
In just single-family dwellings, in traditional environments. So don't talk to me about Mars and moon building. I get that. We need to use what's in situ. I get that. We don't want to transport there. I get that. But suburban Phoenix, single-family home, what's the point? I'm not sure I get the automation advantage.
So it's a great shell actually for suburban Phoenix, right? This one.
Yeah.
No, what I think actually, what I think actually is about this company is great because they're probably pioneering or helping to pioneer the arms, the robotic arms to a degree. So the technology within this sphere will definitely flourish thanks to them. But back to the previous point is this like small percentage improvements versus the current existing technology, traditional timber. Is the question really in my head is how many dollars do we put into a technology to have these little increments, okay? And if these little increments will eventually become some large changes within the industry, right? So are we putting 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion? And what will be the difference between now and once this technology are at a prime level of advancement?
So I love that point, Martin, because it really takes the capital allocator's view. I love it.
Yeah. So, but I think kudos for the arms. I've been looking at these arms actually, and this is quite cool because obviously there is a huge arm between the point where it is connected to the ground and where it is printing. And what is very interesting on this, it's actually all the same thing like we've noticed when we were in Monumental's factory in Amsterdam, is that they struggle with the distance between the base and where the bricks are being laid. What these guys invented, I think, or help advance, is that this part of the arm, it is self-correcting if the big arm is moving due to wind or whatever the reason is. This is self-correcting the position of the print. So it is super cool.
That is amazing. And I think the other piece of IP that traditionally 3D concrete printing companies had to fix, and I'm not sure if that's now for the most part a solved problem or whether it's still very defensible, is also the nozzle. So basically how you control how much material comes out and how it's being controlled in real time, depending on humidity, for example, and how much you then, based on that real-time control, feed more or less binder, for example, into it, or more or less water into it. That traditionally has been another problem that the 3D concrete printing crews had, and I'm sure Icon has found a good solution for that.
Yeah, I also read that in the article that this was going to become their primary, I don't know if necessarily primary, but they were going to put a lot more focus into this Phoenix 3D printing system. So whether I don't know if you could call it a pivot as such, but if they then become a company which is now just providing these printers to other home builders that are considering or using 3D concrete.
Yeah, it was previously this, but how do you transport this? How installation? It requires so many the ground needs to. There's a rails also running. It's such a complicated terrain that you need to tackle. That's pretty smart. That one.
Interesting debate. So maybe it costs $450 million to get us a 3D printing arm, which is very good.
Yeah, and I want to make sure I'm being correctly understood. There are applications for concrete. That's why it is the second widely most used material on the planet, because it is very cheap at high volumes and very cheap to achieve high structural integrity. What I'm saying is, why would anyone use it for a garage or a bigger garage? I'm not getting the product market fit here. If you want to do, to give you an example, right? If you want to do sound barriers 50 kilometers along a highway and you don't want to build formwork for it, or you think that the transportation cost of precast sound barriers for some reason doesn't make sense in a specific area, and someone came along and said, hey, I can print that for you with concrete, and you absolutely love concrete. You don't want it to be other material. I wouldn't be having the same discussion. I don't get the point for like low structural integrity, low volume, single family homes. I'm not getting it.
Yeah. And also, like, part of the reason we're talking about this right now is they cut 25% of staff based on this $2 billion valuation. So maybe it was slightly overhyped, and they need to kind of get back to the ground and like rethink it.
It must be tough. Would some, but consider if you, Patrick, typically, let's just speak objectively, maybe Icon aside, or maybe we do need to consider Icon in this next question. But if a company's cutting staff at 25% of the staff, is there a cause and effect whereby their valuation would dip?
Actually, it could increase even.
That is also not an incorrect point. I mean, when Klarna fired half of their customer service team and they replaced it with AI last year, actually Klarna's profitability went up. So
same Facebook a few years back. Meta.
So that's a great observation. I'm not, typically in venture land, when you are still in like early growth stage, that effect wouldn't necessarily kick in for most of the companies. I mean, we proudly say, and we're pretty alone with that we have, let's say, currently 10 or 11 profitable companies in our portfolio. And sometimes I get ridiculed from founders on LinkedIn who have raised 30 million, have built absolutely nothing. And they say, oh, if I went profitable, I would be less ambitious. Okay, sure. Thanks for your vast life experience of 30 years. That's bullshit. Typically, that's not what companies do. That's my point. Typically, when they're at this stage, they are not profitable, and so firing people then is rarely a move to achieve to just about achieve profitability or to boost an IPO case further. Typically, not commenting on Icon specifically, it's because you need to stretch runway in order to achieve certain milestones, or you find that you have over-invested in a certain bet or a certain experiment that you used money from the last round for, and that bet or experiment is not working out for you. So, and let me give you an example. So there is a company that used to start in oil and gas recruiting called Workrise, and Workrise became a unicorn at some point, and then they expanded into workforce provision for construction projects, which was a TAM expansion, and they used money from that raise to go into construction. Years later, they closed construction and refocused on oil and gas, and I think renewables projects. And so that's what I'm pointing out. Sometimes when you fire people, it's just shutting down an experiment that you did earlier and refocusing on what you think is best for your company. It can be hurtful to your valuation if it's a signal of, oh my God, the core business is just not working and we're not getting it right. But it doesn't have to signal that. You cannot really read into it, because it might be something as harmless as I'm shutting off an earlier experiment that isn't working out. And to Martin's point, for a later company than Icon, it can also signal that you're boosting profitability further.
Yeah. Also looking at the activity, I don't know exactly who they printed it for, apart from what's written here. So 2020, they delivered 3D printed homes for Mexico, non-profit, and then some for homeless shelter in Austin, another non-profit. So it seems like it's, if I can put it this way, like low-value housing type of housing, which actually makes sense. Looking at if you can apply this solution for more high-end type of projects, or even like a mid-market, I would also struggle with it, as we kind of right now we find out for the last few years, I think, and it's been the case, I guess, even before us, that like homes are the biggest assets of the people ever acquire in their lives. So, and they want it to be of a rather good quality. I think that the technology hasn't proven itself to be used in like more mid-end or high-end type of housing.
That's a good point. Which would you want?
In the end, the proof is in the cost padding, right? So if they deliver a home, let's say 20% cheaper than the traditional method, they will have a good market for it. What I'm asking is why, on a first principles basis, and nobody is able on first principles basis to explain it to me so far, on a first principles basis, should it be 20% cheaper than the traditional method? Because it's not a high volume concrete application, which is where concrete shines, and it's not a high structural integrity application, which is where concrete shines. So why should the method with concrete be 20% cheaper on a first principles basis than the traditional method? I'm waiting for the answer. I really want to be convinced, so I'm not asking this cheekily because, I already know the answer. No. Someone is doing this, and if they are smart, they must think first principles, they can achieve 20% cheaper. I haven't understood the first principle behind it yet, so I'm literally asking for months and months and months, what is that first principle?
Yeah. So even if you go back to like earlier first principles, like the whole reason we do beams in concrete or columns in concrete is that this compressive area of a beam or a column is made with concrete just because the concrete strength properties for compression are around 9 times higher than tensile properties features, right? So that's the whole point of using concrete, because it's super good for compression, right?
Right.
And the walls like that, you're not utilizing fully the concrete properties.
Benefits,
It's always physics, Martin. Always physics.
Yeah, come back to these. All right, Owen.
Again, I want to make sure people hear us. I'm asking this specifically, why would you use it for single family and small multifamily dwellings? I'm not asking this for, sound barriers, high-rise buildings, tunnels. I'm not even asking it for foundations. So even for foundations, if you think you have a difficult foundation and you want to eliminate the formwork, and in situ printing can eliminate that formwork, which would otherwise cost tons and tons and tons of money, all of that, I'm getting the first principle. I would still, always validate the numbers, but I'm not getting the first principle for this low structural integrity, low volume application.
Unless that will be 20% of the cost.
Exactly. And then I would want to understand why that would be the case.
Very good. Shall we go to funding?
Funding. What are you funding?
What are you planning to fund on?
Nothing. Q4 2024.
Oh, this funding. I thought you were talking about specific funding of a startup. Okay. So what we've got here. So a guy called Patrick Hellerman had a Q4 AEC-Tech report in which he indicated that the seed round size had surged in last quarter of last year. So Patrick, what should we know about this? Should I pull up the presentation, or how do you want to talk about that?
Let's do that. I'll start with context. So we do this every quarter, that we review the venture funding that goes into architecture, engineering, construction tech, and its surrounding supply chains, of course. And so with that, we're trying to give an objective base of how the venture sector is tracking in absolute numbers, but we're also trying to give always relative perspective, relative to the overall VC market, for example, relative to historical numbers. So let's flip through. Martin, AEC-Tech is now at 36 billion total lifetime venture funding. And I'm always differentiating between what is narrow core construction, so the C part, and what is total AEC-Tech, so including AE. And so, for example, companies that are not included here that I have always taken out are Katerra, View, and Helio, because traditionally they distort the numbers by almost, I want to say, 6 or 7 billion. So actually the 36 would be 43-ish if we included Katerra, View, and Helio. And also recently IPO'd Service Titan is not included because Service Titan it's just not enough AEC. It's too much maybe prop tech, too much blue collar than AEC. You can have a debate about whether it should be included or not, but then many other things should also be included. So just to give you the scope here, there's no right or wrong. It's just, I'm providing a view. And so that view is that we added almost $1 billion of funding in Q4 and now up to 36. And if you move forward, that means that on a, Martin, if you move the slides forward, that means that on a total basis, we are now the second highest market share of venture capital that we have ever been. And that's following a recent quarterly trend where we continuously increased our market share quarterly of total VC. So what this represents is the 900 million that AEC-Tech raised in Q4 was almost 1% of the overall VC funding that was being spent. That's still a blip in the ocean if you think about it, because construction, 10 to 12% of the world's economy, but only 1% of the world's VC, there is room to grow. You cannot truly make the conclusion here that, so it should be 10% of the VC. No, because a lot of the spend that goes into construction is materials, and there's not that much that you can improve with technology about the materials, etc. But about the labor side, the efficiencies and workflows, so maybe 50% of the sector, 30% of the sector we can attack with technology. So there is an argument in fundamental that the VC market share should be in and around 2 to 4% of construction. So great to see that we're now going a little bit up. This will stay volatile, which is why we're tracking it on a quarterly basis, but see the trend line here, and the trend is always your friend. We're up and to the right, and that's awesome.
Question here. So the 1% was Q1 2022, which is kind of probably aftermath of 2021. That's why it's so much. But is it so? Are we having a similar? So if we look at it a year from now, will people be saying that, it was 0.9% because it's a similar environment to that time, or there's perhaps different there's different market environment, and the reason this 0.9% is driven to that level are different and not high?
Great question. And the answer is it's a very, very different environment. Actually, the amount of VC capital that has been raised in 2024 is the lowest since 2014. So it's a complete down market for VC. Now now you have to differentiate a little bit. For early stage VC, it's a relatively healthy VC market. It's not 2021 or anything, but it's relatively healthy. But the big money gets allocated into the growth rounds, and the growth rounds in 2024 were massively depressed still. And that led to the overall VC market having raised as little as 2014, or since 2014. So the environment is very different to your observation about 2021. It's just that most likely construction tech and AEC-Tech is truly maturing. It's in the process of more adoption, better founders coming in, more capital coming in, while the overall VC market develops slightly differently, and that gives us more market share.
Could you also quickly only comment on the reasons for the volatility, the right way of saying it, why does it fluctuate so much?
Why don't you hop onto one of the later slides, and I'll use that to explain it, where I show the top 10 funding rounds in Q4. It's a little bit further, Martin. You'll see it there you go. Exactly. So here we're always analyzing the concentration ratio 4 and concentration ratio 10. So what that means is we take the 4 largest deals of the quarter and the 10 largest deals of the quarter, and we put them in relation to the total funding in the quarter. And so to your question, Martin, the volatility is driven by relatively large funding rounds because the concentration ratios are always somewhere between 20 to 60% on the CR4 and CR10, which means that if you have one super large funding round, it will help with your market share on a quarterly basis. Whereas if you have a quarter where, the largest funding round was maybe 25 or 40 million, then, you will have a quarter where the market share goes a little bit lower, typically, unless you have a huge amount of deals that make up for it, right? So that is the fundamental, that is more the statistical reason. And the fundamental reason is because growth rounds will attract the most capital. And if you have a quarter with fewer very large growth rounds, then that will be a quarter where your market share goes down a little bit. That's why I'm saying the trend is your friend. You want to look at, is this going up and to the right, or is it plateauing? And, for the last 2.5 years, our market share trend is going up and to the right, and that's great.
Mm-hmm. So in your view, you are expecting in the next year or so to have more of these outliers with the very large rounds, or more kind of medium size of rounds?
Yeah, so maybe if I can take a slightly longer term view, Martin, rather than 1 year, because 1 year can be volatile. If it's more of a 2 to 3 year horizon, I absolutely think that fundamentally construction tech is at the point where it's breaking out. And it's been breaking out. before. It's attracting more capital, better founders, etc. And so that will for sure fuel some of the Series A, Series B companies into very large growth rounds, and some of the seed companies into very large early growth rounds. Absolutely, we're exactly at that stage. And I think everybody can feel it, right? I'm just providing numbers here. But if you go to, just the eye test, everybody that is in the industry for the last 5 years or even 10 years will probably attest to that. The current AEC-Tech environment has nothing in common with how it was in 2015 or 2018, 2019. Like back then, the velocity of funding, the round sizes, the mobility of talent into our sector, it was just completely different. It's completely transformed the last 5 to 7 years. And the numbers, in my opinion, confirm that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, where should we go next from this? Should I go back?
Yeah, let's maybe, exactly. This one is great. Let's stay here. So here we're, we're always analyzing the last 4 quarters on a rolling basis, how much funding went in. And so, as you can see, also AEC-Tech from 2024 compared to early 2023, less and less funding in general, in line with the overall VC market, which completely plummeted compared to, for example, 2014. But now we had a last 4 quarters where it's picking up again. And so that's a good signal. And that also means if you compare on the next chart, the current funding since 2021 compared to the pre-2021 funding, we're ways above what construction tech and AEC-Tech was before the crazy year of 2021. Here in the average per quarter, we're up 60%. In the peak quarter, we're up like 3 times actually. So that's a good signal that since the crazy year, we haven't crashed. Actually, as a sector, we have matured further, and that's great.
I actually have a question. So if you've got these bigger numbers in terms of funding, does it mean that it's easier to be a VC or more difficult? My feeling is that it's more difficult because you've got more founders, more people sniffing opportunity. So competition is bigger amongst founders and more difficult to choose them, and also more VCs, I guess, as well, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, does it also show, and maybe perhaps you've seen more qualitatively, Patrick, that more VCs are entering the space?
Yeah, it's. I think it's a question that not enough investors actually ask themselves, and that's why I think it's a smart question, Martin. Let me give you first a meta answer. Maybe it's a fundamental answer.
Are you plugging fundamental all the time?
No, this was fundamental with an U only, without the O. But yes, I appreciate that. Fundamentally, if you want to make money, you need spread. And more volatility allows you to capture more spread on a quicker time basis. Every day trader will know that. Every hedge fund will know that. And so there are fundamentally 2 ways how you can make money if you're trading based on spread. Either you're buying extremely low and you're finding some leverage in the market to buy a lot of volume low, and then you're selling high. And if you have a lot of volatility in the market, that means that the high and the low will be closer to each other. So that means that you are compressing the time frame at which you can realize the spread. Whereas if you're in market or an asset with very low volatility, the time until you can realize the spread will be much longer. That's one principle how you can make money. And another one, if you're a market maker with an attached hedge fund, for example, you would go at the other end of the extreme. You wouldn't try to find huge spreads. You would try to find very, 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 very minimal spreads that are market inefficiencies. I'm talking cents and sub-cents here, but you're doing that at an insane volume. That's the high frequency trading part that was developed the last 10 to 12 years. Sorry, not developed, really scaled the last 10 to 12 years. So fundamentally, that is 2 things how you can benefit from spread. There's a third one, and that is the Buffett method. You're investing in value, and that is typically the VC. I should be careful now. VC is really investing in value or in narratives, but fundamentally, you're not investing into quick volatility. Now, apply those principles to VC, though. For me, if a sector is underappreciated and the assets in it are more depressed compared to other parts of the VC market, that allows me to buy at better prices. And if I now hold for a long time, I can realize, hopefully, a spread because more and more capital is coming into my sector. My assets are maturing, my assets are good, but overall the demand for my assets is going up. So that's a spread over a 7 to 10 year period that I'm hoping to catch, which means, now coming from the fundamental to your question, Martin, if the prices go up in my sector at the time when the demand is very high, I need to make a further bet that the demand will be even higher in 10 years out. So that's how a VC or any kind of investor, similar to the trading strategies that I just mentioned, always has to ask themselves, is this the right entry price? And the entry price is higher with more capital.
Yes, that's true. Okay.
Cool. We don't have much more to go here. Just if you continue with 2 slides, maybe, Martin. So here you see the seed round sizes compared to 10 years earlier. So in principle, VC seed round and early stage rounds are about 250% the size of 2014 rounds. For some weird reason, Q4 shows very large seed rounds in AEC-Tech. That's an anomaly. Don't expect that to keep going. I think here also the trend is your friend, and we are in principle 2 to 3 times larger than we were 10 years ago. Which means also that rounds are more expensive and capital is more expensive. Whereas the growth rounds, you're seeing both. The red one here is total VC, the pink, the purple one is total Construtech. You're seeing that the growth rounds in Q4 were really low and actually lower on average compared to 10 years ago. Okay, we talked about concentration, and then if you go by regions, this is a cool message. I know, Martin, Owen. How many of your listeners are from the US?
Yeah,
30-something percent.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We love the US. Inauguration date next week. I think the world economy hopefully will benefit a lot from stability, constructive policy, etc.
Say it. Say it, Donald Trump.
That's that's why the overall the music plays in the US. I get it, but not only in AEC-Tech, guys. You are doing a big mistake if you're not looking to the east and if you're taking a West-centric view, and the numbers prove that. So here you can see that AEC-Tech in Asia Pacific was 1.3% market share, about 0.5% higher actually than in the Western markets. And overall AEC-Tech funding there was actually larger than in Europe. In Q4 and was about half of what it was in the US. So if you're looking only at the US, you're really missing out on a big opportunity, in my opinion.
Interesting.
So APAC is East, right?
It doesn't cover UAE.
APAC, yeah, that's Asia Pacific.
Asia Pacific.
But not in the Middle East.
So that would be included here.
So back to your point earlier, if there's more capital, the prices are higher of the assets companies. Like you can see, Europe and US, North America is kind of the same proportion of between the total VC and AEC, and APAC is like 50%. On this chart, it is looks like 60%. So that means that
there are 2 different scales. So it's 1.3%. You see it at the top.
Okay. All right. Sorry, confused that. Yeah. Okay. I've got the last one question. Have you got something?
I think we only have 2 more minutes. So
okay, so do you have more calls perhaps from general investors who are more curious about our space because there's more funding, more better rounds or more growth in this industry?
Yeah, difficult to track that on a daily or weekly basis, or possible to track that on a daily or weekly basis. But if you when in doubt, zoom out, and I zoom out like last year compared to the previous 5 years, a lot more, unbelievable. But it doesn't apply to every subsector or every model in construction tech the same way. So I think on-site construction management software isn't getting much appreciation or much love. You have to be a really good company there, and that's fine. Whereas if you go for, let's say, document AI, I think, a lot of generalist investors wanted to do their homework the last year and make sure they're not missing out on something, design technology and how you can reinvent the pre-construction and design stack. That's a very, very interesting space for generalists. So depends on different subsectors. As a whole, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be my question about what areas perhaps this funding was going into, but it seems like you just answered it, Patrick. Okay, guys, I think we are running out of time. We have some Q&A, but maybe we'll save that for next week when we're live at the usual time. Cool.
Sounds good.
And that's Martin's booty call.
I'm sorry.
All right, guys. We'll see you next week. Yeah.
See you next week.
Thank you, guys. Ciao.